A team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
As kids, many of us grew up believing textbooks that told us Americans came from one people, one root, one starting date. But as scientists dug deeper into a set of caves in Oregon's high desert, sealed for over 1,000 years, that story stopped adding up. The caves seemed unremarkable at first. To the archaeologists who first studied them, nothing looked unusual. But buried beneath the surface was evidence few people ever expected to find. What were these caves really hiding? Stay with us till the end as we look at the discoveries rewriting the history of the first Americans. Paisley Caves, the cave that waited 1,000 years. To understand what exactly scientists discovered in Oregon after 1,000 years, we have to go back to the 1930s, when a professor named Luther Cressman found a set of small caves cut into a rocky slope in Oregon's high desert. Today, those caves are known as the Paisley Caves. You see, back then, nobody knew what was hiding inside them, but what they discovered when they finally opened them would leave them in awe. And surprisingly, it would take almost 100 years for the full story to come to light. With the discovery of the cave, Cressman started digging. What came out of the ground surprised him. At first, he found stone tools and old animal bones. And the deeper he went, the more it looked like people had been living in this spot far longer than most scientists at the time believed was possible. That was a bold claim to make, but Cressman had a real problem, one that would haunt this story for decades. Radiocarbon dating did not exist yet. That technology was still 20 years away. All he could do was compare tools by eye and build a rough guess. So his claim just sat there, unproven. Other scientists didn't say he was wrong. Instead, they said he hadn't shown it. And in science, that's almost the same as being wrong. But here's the part almost nobody thinks about, though. The reason any of this survived long enough to matter at all comes down to one simple fact about the land itself. It almost never rains there. Objects made from skin, plant fiber, or wood should not last thousands of years. Under normal conditions, they rot. Moisture-loving bacteria eat away at anything organic, breaking it down until nothing is left. But take the moisture away and that process nearly stops completely. Scientists have seen this exact pattern in other extremely dry places around the world, like the tombs of the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, where a dry desert cave works almost like a sealed vault. For thousands of years, without anyone intending it, these Oregon caves quietly protected whatever people left behind inside them. So because almost nobody believed him, and because he didn't have the resources or the technology to back up his claims, Cressman never got the chance to open that vault properly. He had a hunch. He had some careful digging, but in the eyes of the wider scientific world, he had achieved nothing significant. He kept working in Oregon for decades after that. He went on to make other real discoveries, including a set of 9,000-year-old sandals at a nearby site called Fort Rock Cave. But the deeper question about the Paisley Caves, how old they really were and what that meant, stayed unanswered. Sadly, Cressman died in April 1994 in Eugene, Oregon, at the age of 96. And after he was gone, the Paisley Caves went quiet. For years, nobody picked the question back up. Then, almost 70 years later, a new scientist arrived, and what he discovered would end up revolutionizing history. In 2002, University of Oregon archaeologist Dennis Jenkins went back into the Paisley Caves. He wasn't looking at tools, he wasn't looking at bones, he was testing coprolites, the scientific term for fossilized human feces. It sounds strange, maybe even a little gross. But coprolites hold something almost nothing else at an ancient site can offer. Usable human DNA, direct evidence of the actual people who lived there. What Dennis Jenkins found would eventually land in the pages of Science, one of the most respected journals in the world. And it would put this quiet stretch of Oregon desert at the center of one of American archaeology's most heated arguments in decades. Here's why that argument existed in the first place. For most of the 20th century, textbooks taught one clean, simple story about how humans first reached America. It was called Clovis First. The idea was simple. The earliest Americans crossed from Siberia into Alaska over a land bridge called Beringia, then spread south roughly 13,000 years ago, hunting Ice Age animals with a very specific style of stone spear point. first discovered near Clovis, New Mexico. That story held up in classrooms for generations. Because of it, anyone who claimed humans arrived earlier than that ran straight into a wall of doubt, because a single surprising date could always be explained away. Some would call it contamination or a lab mistake. Jenkins was about to hit that wall head-on. His coprolites came back dated to roughly 14,300 years old. That's older than Clovis, more than 1,000 years older. Genetic testing tied the DNA to a maternal lineage common in Siberia, the same ancestry line linked to Native American populations today. If these dates held up, it meant people were living in Oregon more than 1,000 years before the so-called first Americans were supposed to have set foot anywhere on the continent. And here is the shocker. You would think a discovery like that would be celebrated right away. It wasn't. The scientific community did not simply accept it. Critics started asking hard questions almost immediately. Questions like, was this really human waste at all? Could it have come from a dog, a wolf, or a bear instead? And an even bigger problem, could DNA have slowly leaked downward through the cave's sediment over thousands of years, making newer material look far older than it actually was? One of the most respected voices in American archaeology, Hendrik Poinar, raised serious public concerns about the site's layers being disturbed. And Jenkins himself later admitted something surprising. The evidence felt thin. Too few artifacts sat directly next to the coprolites to settle the argument on context alone. So instead of defending his findings from a distance, Jenkins did something almost nobody expected. Something that could have ended his career on the spot. Stay with us because you really don't want to miss what he did. The confirmation of Paisley Cave. In the fall of 2009, Dennis Jenkins did something almost no researcher in his position would dare to try. He invited his harshest critics to come to the Paisley Caves themselves. Think about how risky that actually was. These weren't casual skeptics posting doubts from a distance. If anything, they were serious, respected scientists who had publicly questioned whether his entire discovery was even real. They would all gather to verify it for themselves. That's a bold move because it's not common practice in science. Most researchers, when their work comes under serious attack, defend it from a distance instead. That boldness led to September 2009, when a group of archaeologists who study the people of the Americas gathered at the Paisley Caves. They came from outside institutions specifically to review the evidence. Federal officials were there too, along with a representative from the Klamath tribe. The group spent 2 full days on site examining the sediment layers directly, checking a newly found bone tool and assessing the plant and animal evidence Jenkins had pulled from the caves. The bone tool mattered because of who found it and where. A team member named Kevin Smith had been digging through a layer thick with extinct horse, bison, and camel bone when he felt his trowel hit something different. It turned out to be a crafted bone tool, sitting in sediment that dated to roughly 14,230 years old, right in the same ancient layers as the coprolites. Exactly the same thing Jenkins said. David Meltzer, an archaeologist from Southern Methodist University who attended the review, called it an impressive presentation. But he didn't hand Jenkins a clean win. His actual words were more careful than that. This is clearly an important site, he said, but there are still tests that need to be done to seal the deal. That line said everything about where things stood. The site had earned respect, but it hadn't yet earned certainty. And the hardest questions left on the table weren't the kind anyone could answer just by walking around and looking at dirt. They were deeply technical questions. Questions like, could DNA actually migrate downward through thousands of years of sediment? Could water seeping slowly through the cave floor over centuries, or something as unglamorous as rodent urine, carry genetic material from a newer layer down into a much older one? If that had happened, the ancient date wouldn't mean what everyone hoped it meant. It would just be modern DNA sitting somewhere it shouldn't be, making an ordinary layer look impossibly old. Those questions needed more than a site visit. They needed new evidence gathered specifically to answer them. So starting in 2009 and running through 2011, Jenkins and his team went back to work. This time, the entire excavation was built around a single goal: answer every criticism directly with hard data, not with reassurance. The scale of this new effort is hard to overstate. The team pulled 190 separate radiocarbon dates from the site, not just from the coprolites themselves, but from a wide range of material sitting in the same layers. The plant remains. Animal bone, even tiny fragments of sagebrush twigs buried in the sediment. Every single sample was mapped and tracked precisely, down to the exact spot in the cave floor it had come from. This wasn't a handful of convenient data points. It was an attempt to build a complete, defensible picture of the site, layer by layer, with nothing left to guesswork. But it did not end there. Then came the part built specifically to answer the leaching question head-on. Jenkins sent samples out to independent laboratories, places with no connection to his own research team and no stake in the outcome, and had them run blind tests. The scientists doing the testing didn't know in advance which samples were expected to be ancient and which weren't. They simply tested what landed on their bench and reported what they found with no idea what answer Jenkins was hoping for. The results came back, and they matched. The ancient date was held. The human DNA really was as old as the original 2008 paper claimed. It wasn't younger material that had somehow leaked downward through the dirt and fooled everyone. Independent labs, working blind, had confirmed it on their own. But the deeper the team dug during those 3 years, the more they found something else buried in those same layers. Something that would turn out to matter just as much as the coprolites. Maybe more. Stone tools. A specific recognizable style known as Western stemmed points. Sharp, carefully shaped, clearly the work of skilled hands. When these tools were dated, they came back at least 13,200 years old. Older than Clovis, sitting in the exact same ancient layers as the coprolites, right alongside the human DNA that had caused so much controversy in the first place. Here is the detail that made all of this so significant, the one that turned a confirmed date into something much bigger. Nowhere in those layers, and nowhere near them, was there a single trace of classic Clovis technology. There were no fluted points or even a sign of the tool-making style that textbooks had credited for generations as the very first culture in the Americas. It simply wasn't there, which left researchers facing one of two possibilities. Either the accepted story about the first Americans was missing something important, or it was fundamentally wrong. Whichever answer they chose, one thing was clear. The old, clean version of history with a single migration, a single technology, and a single starting date could no longer survive what had just emerged from an Oregon cave floor. But just when they thought they had seen everything the Paisley Caves had to offer, another scientist arrived, uncovering yet another layer that few ever imagined existed. Rimrock Draw, a cave born out of Paisley Cave. In 2017, a researcher named Lisa Marie Shalido joined the Paisley Caves project. Working out of Newcastle University, she teamed up with Jenkins and his team to try something almost nobody had bothered doing before at this site. She wasn't looking at all the artifacts. She was looking at the sediment itself at a microscopic level, searching for details invisible to the naked eye. Think of it like this. If the earlier work had proven the house was standing, Shalido's job was to check the foundation, brick by brick, under a microscope. She and her team sliced thin sections of cave sediment and studied them layer by layer, looking for any sign that the site's story didn't hold up. They looked for any sign of mixing, any sign of disturbance that could quietly undermine everything that came before. What she found matched everything Jenkins had already claimed. There was no hidden mixing, no disturbance strong enough to explain away the dates. It was one more layer of proof stacked on top of years of proof already sitting there. And with that, the Paisley Caves went from a controversial claim to something close to settled fact in the archaeological world. But here's the thing about big discoveries. They rarely stay isolated for long. Once one site proves something this important, scientists start looking elsewhere for confirmation. And that's because real proof doesn't stop at one location either. If people really were living in Oregon this early, you would expect to find some trace of them somewhere else nearby. So the search began. Fortunately, they didn't have to look for long. Just about 70 miles from Paisley, in Oregon's Harney County, they found a completely different kind of site, one that would raise even more questions about what we thought we knew. Keep watching for more. The site was a shallow rock shelter called Rimrock Draw. And what was quietly happening there while the world was still absorbing the Paisley results would turn out to be even more explosive. Leading the work at Rimrock Draw was archaeologist Patrick O'Grady, working through the University of Oregon in partnership with the Bureau of Land Management. Unlike Paisley, this wasn't a site that exploded into headlines overnight. It was the opposite. Year after year, O'Grady's team dug through dirt by hand, screening enormous amounts of sediment, pulling out one small stone flake at a time. Slow, patient, unglamorous work. Then in 2012, something changed everything. The team uncovered fragments of camel and bison teeth. Both animals vanished from North America thousands of years ago. Alongside them, they found something even more interesting, a finely crafted scraper made from orange agate. This is why that detail matters so much. Agate like this doesn't occur naturally anywhere in eastern Oregon. Whoever made that tool either traveled a long distance to get the material or got it through some kind of trade. Either way, it was a small, sharp clue about how connected and mobile these ancient people really were. And there's more. On that same scraper, researchers found something almost unbelievable for an object this old. Traces of preserved blood residue, later identified as coming from Bison antiquus, an extinct ancestor of the modern buffalo. A silent signature of the exact moment someone used this tool, thousands and thousands of years ago. But the artifact alone wasn't the biggest discovery. It was where the artifact was sitting. The scraper and the animal teeth were found buried beneath a distinct layer of volcanic ash. Not just any ash. This layer came from an eruption of Mount St. Helens, the same volcano famous for its dramatic 1980 eruption, though this was a much, much older event. Geologists had already independently dated that specific ash layer to somewhere between 15,000 and 15,800 years old, using dating methods that had nothing to do with archaeology at all. Now, it's important to note that volcanic ash works almost like a stopwatch buried in the ground. Each eruption leaves behind a chemical signature scientists can trace back to an exact date. If your artifacts are sitting below that layer, they have to be older than the ash itself. There's no way around it, which meant everything found beneath that ash layer at Rimrock Draw was already older than 15,000 years, just based on geology alone. But O'Grady's team wasn't finished. They took the camel and bison tooth enamel and sent it out for radiocarbon dating, first in 2018, then again in 2023, just to make absolutely sure the results were consistent and not some kind of fluke. The number that came back stopped people in their tracks. 18,250 years before present. That's not an exaggeration. If that number holds up under further scrutiny, it would place people in Oregon's high desert thousands of years earlier than even the record-breaking dates at Paisley Caves. Older than Clovis by a very huge margin. Older even than most other confirmed sites anywhere in North America. O'Grady himself later admitted just how startling this whole process felt. Discovering that 15,000-year-old ash layer alone had been a shock. But when the enamel came back dated to 18,000 years, sitting below stone tools and flakes, it was, in his own words, even more startling than the ash itself. And that's when the real question started. Was Rimrock Draw about to become the strongest evidence yet that humans reached North America far earlier than anyone had dared to claim, or was it about to face the exact same wall of skepticism that once stood in front of Paisley Caves? Stay tuned to find out what the future holds for Rimrock Draw. There's a detail about Rimrock Draw that most headlines leave out, and it matters more than people realize. Paisley Caves earned its place in the scientific record the hard way. Every major claim went through full peer review, published in the journal Science, checked and rechecked by outside experts before anyone accepted it as fact. Rimrock Draw hasn't gone through that same process yet. The 18,250-year date has been shared through Bureau of Land Management press releases and conference presentations, not through a peer-reviewed paper. Although that doesn't mean it's wrong, it means the final formal test still hasn't happened. And in science, that test matters. A number announced at a press conference carries a different kind of weight than a number that has survived independent scientists trying to poke holes in it for months. Rimrock Draw is still waiting for that stage. One of the researchers ready to do exactly that kind of poking is Donald Grayson, an archaeologist at the University of Washington. His concern echoes almost exactly what critics once said about Paisley Caves. Could the agate scraper have shifted downward through the ash layer over thousands of years, ending up in a spot that made it look older than it actually is? Until researchers can prove the ash layer sits undisturbed, with no breaks or gaps that could explain that kind of movement, Grayson has made his position clear. Extreme skepticism is all the claim is going to get from him. You have to understand that that's not an insult. It's how the process is supposed to work. It's the exact same fire Paisley Caves walked through years earlier, and it came out the other side stronger for it. But there's a piece of this story that has nothing to do with labs or radiocarbon dates at all. and it might be the most striking detail in the entire investigation. David Lewis, an anthropologist who earned his doctorate at the University of Oregon and now teaches at Oregon State University, pointed out something remarkable about the timing of rimrock draws dates. Tribal nations across this region carry oral histories describing a series of massive geological floods, known today as the Missoula floods, that reshaped the landscape somewhere between 18,000 and 15,000 years ago. That's the exact same window rimrock draws evidence points to. Lewis didn't stop there. He noted that many tribes also carry stories about encountering giant animals and even monsters on the land long ago. Rimrock Draw's own evidence shows people living alongside megafauna, animals like camels and ancient bison, species that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. It's entirely possible those very animals became characters woven into oral histories passed down for thousands of years, long before anyone had a written language to record any of it. Think about what that means. Long before radiocarbon dating existed, long before scientists ever set foot in these caves with modern tools, the descendants of these same people had already been carrying pieces of this story forward. Not in a lab or in a journal as modern people do, but around fires. From one generation to the next, science is only now catching up to something that was never actually lost. Now here comes the interesting part. Imagine what a confirmed discovery like this could actually mean beyond science. Think about what happens to a place once the world learns it might be the oldest human site on the continent. People travel across the globe just to stand in places like that. Look at Mesa Verde in Colorado or Chaco Culture, National Historical Park in New Mexico. Both are remote, both sit in the middle of nowhere, and both pull in hundreds of thousands of visitors every single year simply because of what they represent. Entire local economies, hotels, guided tours, museums, gift shops have grown up around sites far less dramatic than an 18,000-year-old rock shelter. A quiet stretch of Harney County, Oregon, one of the least visited corners of the state, could suddenly become a name people around the world recognize, and that's exactly why a discovery like this matters beyond science itself. When Paisley Caves earned its place in the record, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places. In 2014, a designation that brings federal recognition, protection, and the kind of attention that turns a remote desert site into a destination people travel to see. If Rimrock Draw's dates survive peer review the way Paisley's did, it's reasonable to expect the same path. A quiet rock shelter in Harney County could become one of the most significant and most visited archaeological sites in the country. That scale is exactly why the Bureau of Land Management didn't stay quiet about it. Heather Ulrich, the BLM's Oregon and Washington archaeology lead, called it a very exciting development for the archaeological community. In her own words, the new dates push our archaeological knowledge of human occupation in North America even farther, perhaps the oldest yet. So, by all indications, the story isn't finished. Rimrock Draw still awaits peer review and more testing is underway. Somewhere in that same desert, another cave may still be waiting to be discovered. But one thing is certain. Oregon's high desert has already rewritten American history once, and it might be doing it again. This time, we just have to wait and see. What do you think about what Oregon's deserts are revealing about the first Americans? And if Rimrock Draw's dates are confirmed, do you think it changes everything we thought we knew about who really got here first? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you found this video valuable, like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video on your screen right now. You will not regret it.